what the? Mama warned me about women like you. I was hoping she was right.
Hello, fellow basement dreadles, and in today's video, we will be talking about which of the Primarchs had the best and the worst childhoods. We will be going all the way from the very bottom all the way to the very top.
It's morbid time.
Happy Mother's Day, and let's get into the video. Alright, the Primarch who had the worst childhood is Conrad Coles. Now, Conrad Coles, he landed on a planet, and the first thing that happened to him is a cannibal tried to one-up and eat him. And being a psychic baby, Primarch, he was able to kill the man, and due to the Primarch's hunger, he eventually ate the man. And all of this man's memories were transported into Conrad. So an actual, 5-year-old had to defend himself from a grown man who wanted to eat and, grape him. And then ate him out of pure hunger, because he was growing, and gained all this guy's memories. Now, Conrad had a just innate sense of justice, so he tried to stop all the crimes on his planet, and would occasionally, out of sheer hunger, because half his planet was starving and there was no food for him, would occasionally eat the criminals who he had captured. Now, don't get me wrong, that's pretty effed up, but do remember, all you are as a human being is what people put into you as a child. If people raise you to be a monster, you will be a monster. That is why Conrad's a monster, because that's literally all he knew. That's all the memories he had, that's all the people he was exposed to. And eventually, the story, he began to torture people horrifically and then eat them to, get people to stop committing crimes. Genuinely, not a single person on Conrad's entire planet ever loved him, talked to him, or respected him. The only times people would even acknowledge him was out of fear. That's literally it. The only time people talked to him is while they were trembling, even if he was trying to be nice. So yeah, in my opinion, Conrad has the worst childhood. Now, the 17th slot, a lot of people are going to disagree with me on the 17th and 18th slot, but yeah, so the 17th slot is Angwan. Now, there was a genuine argument that Angwan had the worst childhood here. Just according to me, I think Conrad takes the W, I guess L. Angwan, similar to Conrad, spawned on this planet and was immediately jumped not just by a single pervert cannibal, but was jumped by an Eldar kill team. And he was able to beat them all to death. Then after that, a bunch of slavers enslaved them, of course, and made him fight in gladiator pits. Similar to Conrad, he was a very good man and didn't want to cause anyone pain, even though he had to kill people. So instead of, there was a point where, he had to pretty much fight people, and anyone who died would get thrown in an acid pit. He would intentionally, break their necks, so that way they wouldn't, feel the pain of the acid. So decent guy? Good guy, because he was forced to do that, but he could have killed them a lot more painfully. He gave them painless deaths intentionally. The reason why I think he edges out Conrad is because people actually loved him. The other gladiator slaves actually loved him, would sleep next to him, and quickly realized he was an empath and could physically take their pain emotionally and physically. Being a Primarch, he could just take a lot more of that. So they pretty much all sleep in a circle holding hands. So unlike Conrad, Angwan was actually loved, even if arguably he went through more crap. But I would say actually having people around you who love you. But yeah, at some point in time, he was forced to fight and kill his father. And everyone around him just betrayed him. And keep in mind, this is childhood, not how the Emperor handled him. I think the Emperor handled Angwan the worst out of any of the Primarchs. So if it was who had the worst life in general, I might give it to Angwan, but if it's just childhood, Angwan's 17th. Now, next up, Mortarion. Now, Mortarion was literally just adopted from day one by a necromancer, alien, mutant thing, and was pretty much forced to use his psychic powers to hurt people and mutilate, necromance. Also, his daddy, chained him up to what is pretty much described as Chernobyl to make him tougher. So yeah, a pretty hard effing life. After this, though, he eventually was able to break free and, met up with some normal humans. But in terms of actual childhood, it was pretty much him being forced to mutilate people, torture people, and just use his powers for not good. Which left him mentally scarred and hating psychos forever until he eventually started using psychic powers, but whatever. Anyway, pretty bad childhood being chained up to Chernobyl and, forced to necromance. Next up, number 15, and this is a bit of a jump in the good way. Well, not really, but somewhat. Lionel Johnson. Mr. Lionel Johnson grew up in the woods of Caliban, alone, having to fight off monsters from a baby. Yeah, not that good. So, Lionel Johnson had to fight off these horrific monsters in the woods for literally ever, but he kind of took it pretty well. Like, he was a bit outdoorsy. I mean, he was a bit of an introvert. Maybe if he, grew up with people, he wouldn't be such a weirdo, but yeah, all things considered, his childhood really sucked. Like, it was literally just him fighting off monsters, but there was... He ended up pretty decently, and after he was found as a kid, he was raised by knights and, his adoptive dad, pretty much, who did love him. Don't get wrong, his adoptive dad would later on kind of be a dickhead, would get corrupted by chaos, and would become super jealous and consider allowing Lionel Johnson to get nuked. But in terms of just, actually growing up as a kid, not, anything past an adult, I'm not really taking in the, consideration. But in terms of actually kid, he was really effed up, grew up in the woods, fighting monsters, but then was raised by a loving, caring knight dad, who was also, like, the leader of the knight area. So he was pretty much raised by the king, but he did spend a very long time, in the woods alone. Next up, Lehman Russ. Now, Lehman Russ and Lionel Johnson could kind of be swapped, but I just feel like Lehman Russ, on paper, Lehman Russ had a really bad childhood, but he doesn't think it that way. He kind of likes it. Like, he looks back, literally being raised by actual wolves. That is not a joke. I'm not talking about, like, barbarians. I'm not talking about primitive people. No, actual wolves. And he just looks back at it like, oh, yeah, that was nice. So, yeah, Lehman Russ is very funny like that. But, yeah, I'm putting him at number 4 even though Lionel Johnson had a worse childhood than him, I'm putting Lehman Russ slightly higher because he just loved it so much. Like, I feel like he was literally built for that childhood and he just really liked it. Yeah, but he was raised by woods, hunting monsters, became like the hero of his planet. People liked him. Alright, next up, Ferus Manus. Now, Ferus Manus, the man with the iron hands, he crashed. Now, don't get me wrong, his childhood sucked. He crashed into an Necron tomb, awoke this giant serpent, and literally had to spend all of his life hunting it. But again, the reason why I'm putting him so high, well, comparatively, is because he just liked it. Bro was even when Bro was a grown man and he had the options, live among humans who accepted him and loved him, he was like, nah, I'm just gonna stay in the woods, in my mountain, and just forge and hunt stuff. He loved, like, I genuinely, if he had the option of any other, like, Primarch, if he had the option to grow up like any other Primarch, the only 2 I think he would, swap for, maybe 3. The only 3 he would swap with is Vulcan, with Lehman Russ, and Lionel Johnson. He is just an outdoorsy fella who likes fighting horrific monsters. Alright, next up on our list, Corvus Corax. Now, Corvus being an emo, he had to be different, so he landed on a moon, not a planet. But this moon was pretty much a mining colony for a planet that was filled to the brim with slaves and slave masters. Now, he was found by the slaves and kept safe from the masters, like they pretty much would keep him hidden in hiding holes. He didn't necessarily have a mom or dad. It was, again, like, child of the village type deal. But pretty much all the slaves actually kind of loved him and looked up to him and treated him pretty well, giving him, food, all that stuff. And all in all, he grew up knowing love, even though he pretty much had to live Harry Potter style, hiding from the slave guards. Eventually, though, we all know the story. He was found by the slave guards, but not really, because he's actually has a psychic ability to make you perceive him as invisible. And so, yeah. All in all, he was loved by people around him, and he had at least some of the things he needed growing up. Alright, next up, Fulgrim. Now, Fulgrim landed on a planet, and literally the first thing that the people wanted to do was bash his head in with a rock, because that's where you do the babies on that planet that didn't, have a mother or father, because the planet had such, like, thin resource margins that you pretty much had to kill all baby. There were no orphans on this planet, because we can't even take care of ourselves. No one, even the rich people on the planet, had thin margins. Pretty much everyone was living on the very brink, so they didn't have the resources to take care of a baby. But Fulgrim pretty much hit them with the mewing face, and he was too handsome, I guess, to kill, so they kept him. And every day he would go to the mines and absolutely just destroy his body, working as hard as he can, doing the shifts of, I think, like 10 men or something. Now, because of this and his inherent beauty and leadership skills, everyone around him pretty much loved him. And again, little child of the village type deal, where pretty much everyone would raise him, but everyone kind of loved him, and everyone thought he was a cool guy, although he did have to work insanely hard, but he did get more resources than the average person because he was working so hard. But yeah, all in all, people loved him, but he was in a tough spot. Next up, Lorgoy. Lorgoy was on a desert type planet where his adoptive father was a priest who would abuse him. No, not that kind of abuse, but more like physical, drunken, slapping abuse, beatings, and emotional manipulation, not any Diddy shenanigans. But he did at least go up with some stability, so that's why he's at 10. Next up, Sanguinius. Sanguinius landed on a planet, and on this planet there was, pretty much a constant big war between mutants and non-mutants. And Sanguinius having wings was considered a mutant, but he was considered a noble mutant, like a mutant from God. So the non-mutants of his planet loved him, and all in all, although the planet he was on was a super harsh desert, so similar to Fulgrim, he did have a hard life simply due to the planet he was on. The people around him loved him and treated him well, raising him, feeding him, all that stuff. But eventually, when he was still a boy or a teenager, the mutants killed most of the people he loved. Not all of them, but a lot of them. And he completely tricked the flip out and just massacred the mutants on mass scale. Literally just becoming a meat blender and just plowing through everyone. But all things considered, people loved him and looked up to him and treated him well. So, yeah, pretty good. Next up, Horus. Horus Lupercal grew up on a giant hive city that was pretty much run by gangsters, and one of the head gangsters of the mafia's gangsters, stuff like that, one of the head mafia guys pretty much took him in and raised him as a part of the gang. And all things because don't get me wrong, he had a hard life because obviously there were other gangs competing, so he was never safe, but the gangsters and the criminals and whatnot would protect him and treat him pretty well. They treated him like he was one of their own. So all things considered, he was loved by the people around him, and he did have a lot of luxuries that a lot of the Primarchs low on the list didn't have. But still, it was fairly unsafe, and he grew up with the idea that murdering a little man is what makes you a man. So pretty good, but not the best. Next up, 7, Vulcan. Vulcan landed on pretty much a giant lava planet. A planet was so liquidy and lava-y that sometimes the tectonic plates would just kind of shift due to all the lava and whatnot. And so because of that, the people on the planet were actually very, very kind and would constantly look out for each other, because I can't survive by myself, but I can survive if we look out for each other. So the people on his planet were very nice, and he was adopted and raised by a blacksmith. This blacksmith was very kind to Vulcan and gave him a pretty good life. Don't get me wrong, it wasn't a life of any luxury, but it was a life of constant love. The blacksmith genuinely loved Vulcan, but eventually Vulcan, while still a teenager or a kid possibly, learned about the Gukawi way, the Dark Eldar. He learned about the Dark Eldar and picked up 2 giant warhammers and ignored his blacksmith dad and went out and beat 100 of these elves to death, and killing so many of them so brutally that they'd never come back to the planet. All things considered, literally everyone on his planet's already nice, so everyone on his planet loved him and treated him really well and was really nice to him, but he's lower on the list because his planet and his life was still very hard simply due to the climate. And of course the geography and all that stuff itself. But the actual people on the planet are the best. Number 6, Alfarius. Now, we don't exactly know where Alfarius was raised, and we also don't know who raised Alfarius, but a common theory is that Alfarius was actually raised by Alfarius in the Alfarius sector. I'm sorry. We're actually going to be waiting Omegon, because we don't know where Alfarius was raised, but we do know that Omegon was raised by Malcador. Now, Alfarius wasn't exactly, bathed in love growing up, being raised by Malcador, but Malcador was a pretty decent guy who probably, showed him some love and affection. Malcador was a decent guy to Alfarius, although it was much more of a student-master type deal. Next up, Podoabo. Podoabo had a very good life. He was picked up and adopted by one of the tyrants, the head honchos of his planet, and was treated fairly well. Unfortunately, though, despite Podoabo getting constant love from his adoptive father, Podoabo wanted love more than anything, but didn't really understand what love was. So even though his adoptive dad loved him, he didn't really realize that and just thought that his adoptive dad was using him. So because of that, he felt alone and hated, even though his adoptive father really did love him, which is really, really sad. Although his sister still loved him, and he knew that his sister actually loved him. Although, again, being the tyrant's son, even though he felt hated, even though he wasn't, he still was given a life of luxury. Alright, next up, the Khan, at number 4. Now, the Khan had a pretty good life, like, really good. He was literally just picked up by one of the warlords of his planet and was simply allowed to roam freely and pretty much do whatever he wanted. Eventually, though, his father was killed, and he, got vengeance on the killers. But all things considered, pretty much his whole life was fairly nice, conquering cities, doing this, defeating armies, which doesn't sound that good. I mean, riding around and being free sounds good, but, conquering and all the war doesn't sound good. But Jagakai really, really liked it. He was really meant for that, despite being swapped with Fulgrim at both. But, yeah, so, all in all, he had a pretty good life, and his dad really did love him. Next up, Magnus the Red. Now, Magnus didn't really have a dad, but he was pretty much raised by a bunch of psychic monks, with psychic monk wizard things. Well, they loved him and treated him well and thought he was pretty much the best of them. So they treated him well, gave him a life of luxury, and just genuinely loved him. And eventually, though, he would, defeat these weird psychic parasites, which would make them love him even more. And he pretty much grew up as he pretty much grew up as a superstar of his planet, being loved by all. Next up at number 2 is Dawn. Now, Wogo Dawn landed on a planet that was pretty much Russia. Well, it had a very highly industrialist type people that didn't really show too much emotion, and he was adopted and raised by a grandfather type figure, and was raised pretty well. Don't get me wrong, he wasn't exactly getting hugs every day from his grandpa, but his grandpa did love him and gave him everything he needed to grow. So yeah, Wogo Dawn had a pretty good childhood, being raised by basically his grandpa. And I think we all know who number 1 is. Gilliman. Gilliman's mom is the absolute GOAT, and Gilliman definitely had the best childhood. Now, Gilliman landed on a planet known as Macragge, and was literally adopted by the nobles of Macragge, so huge W right there. And these weren't just nobles, this was the ruling family of Macragge. And because Gilliman was both fully accepted by his adopted family and loved, so because of that, he was, being set up to be the next emperor of his planet. So he was fully loved by the kindest woman in the galaxy, fully loved by the kindest, most honorable man in the galaxy, his father, and was set up to be, the next ruler, and grew up with a life of mega luxury. So yeah, Gilliman definitely had the best childhood by far, but yeah. What are your thoughts on the list? Please, down in the comments, tell me what you disagree with. I know there's going to be a lot of people who disagree with Angron and the Conrad, rankings, but yeah, please tell me in the comments below where you think everyone should lie, and what problems you have on my list, what things do you agree with my list. Did I make a good argument for blank? Did I make a bad argument for blank? Anyway, please leave your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. If you liked the video, please subscribe, and I will be catching you guys in the next one. Happy Mother's Day.